Jeffrey Ardy.
I found it really fascinating trying to come to terms with two very different positions, because it seems to me there are lots of problems of trying to apply what is essentially a Western discussion in a Western context with English language to what the situation is in India. And I really agree entirely with what Sarah is saying, and particularly in relation to the issue of conversion, what on earth that might mean. I think this is really one of the central issues, is what does one really mean by conversion, and what are people in US prisons trying to do. Now it seems to me, as you've already indicated, which was really spot on, and that is that in your very interesting paper, which raises all these sorts of issues, the thing is that there's not one kind of idea of conversion, as you said, in the States itself. And so what you've got is a mixture of different models of conversion, as you said, in the States itself. And on the other hand, you've also got very different ideas of what it is in conversion is in India too. And I just wanted to pinpoint some of these things. Instead of going on about this, I want to suggest some of these specific models of what conversion might be, what the definitions of conversion have been. I would say, to start with, that the whole idea in the West of conversion, in a sense, comes out of the Acts of the Apostles and St. Paul's teaching, which really emphasises all of the Western and basic definitions really emphasise changes within inner change, changes within the person itself, and this sort of emphasis really springs out of the Acts of the Apostles and early Christian teaching. But even in the West, you've got different ideas of what conversion actually involves. Now, one definition that is often quoted from a historian in the 19th century by the name of Knock, he talks about conversion. By conversion we mean the reorientation of the soul of an individual, his deliberate turning from indifference, I'm sorry about the sexist language, but that's the 19th century way, his deliberate turning from indifference or from an earlier form of piety in a life to another, turning from one form of piety to another. A turning that implies a consciousness that a great change is involved, that the old was wrong and the new is right. So there's a very kind of polarised situation, and that is, I would say, very much the evangelical kind of definition of what conversion is, a sudden dramatic change where things are all turned around, where it's a turning. Now there are other American Christian views of what conversion might be. This is the second point about the Western type of conversion. Conversion, this is a quotation from a man called Clark on the psychology of religion. Conversion is that type of spiritual growth or development which involves an appreciable change of direction concerning religious ideas and behaviour. Most clearly and typically, it denotes an emotional episode of illuminating suddenness, that's St. Paul, of course, which may be deep or superficial. And this is the important rider to all this. Though this may take place, this change may also take place and come about in a more gradual process. So there are many Christians in the West who emphasise that conversion is an ongoing process, that it's like a journey that is often discussed in the New Testament, where people are travelling on the way, where people constantly realise and they have new visions, new epiphanies, where they're constantly growing, and that is a form of conversion. It's a continual process where you cannot necessarily say, this is where I was converted, this is the time, but that this is an ongoing process. So that's basically the Western kind of thing, which focuses very much on the inner life and changes in the inner life.
Yeah, and I could respond to your first comments about Christianity, and then maybe you could bring in the Indian case in a minute. I think to focus on biblical models and evangelical models of Christianity is to hugely narrow the range of understanding within Christian communities about what conversion is. I mean, and one way to ask this question is to say, how do you become a Christian? Well, in 2,000 years of Christian history, most Christians haven't become Christians because they fell off a horse, or even because they had a moment of personal illumination. I think that what's distinctive about at least contemporary evangelical Christianity in the U.S., and this is certainly a strain within Christianity, is that you can only become a Christian by being converted. You must, sometime in your adult life, have an experience of conversion, of being born again, in order to become a Christian. And before that, you're not a Christian, and anybody else who calls themselves a Christian who hasn't had a born-again experience is also not a Christian. But all those other people, who we as scholars would also, kind of include as Christians, most of them have become Christians because they grew up as Christians, and many of them don't think about it. If you think about all the Christians in human history, whole countries like Iceland became Christians. Iceland's interesting because they were converted by law. And one day they were not Christians, the next day the whole country was Christians. So there are a lot of models in the course of Christian history that are present in all forms of Christianity today. So I think it's important not to emphasize St. Paul too much.